The crisp November air in suburban Chicago carried the scent of burning leaves and distant fireplaces as I pulled my modest Honda Civic into the driveway of my childhood home. The two-story colonial house stood proudly with its perfectly manicured lawn, now dotted with fallen maple leaves that my father would undoubtedly rake tomorrow morning. Through the large bay window, I could see the warm glow of the dining room chandelier casting dancing shadows on the cream-colored walls. I sat in my car for a moment, watching my breath fog the windshield, trying to muster the courage to face another Thanksgiving dinner. At 28, these family gatherings had become increasingly difficult to endure. The weight of constant comparisons, the subtle jabs disguised as jokes, and the perpetual feeling of being the family disappointment pressed down on my shoulders like a heavy winter coat. My phone buzzed with a text from my younger brother, Nathan. "Mom's asking where you are. Better hurry before she starts the Ryan's always late speech." I couldn't help but smile despite my anxiety. Nathan, at 25, had always been the golden child, Harvard MBA, investment banking job in Manhattan, the kind of success story my parents loved to brag about to their neighbors. Walking up the familiar stone pathway, I noticed Nathan's sleek BMW M3 parked perfectly beside my father's Lexus SUV. The contrast wasn't lost on me. My 6-year-old Honda with its small dent on the rear bumper looked like the odd one out, much like how I felt in this family. The front door opened before I could even ring the bell, and my mother, Patricia, stood there with her practiced smile. At 55, she maintained the same elegant appearance that had served her well as a real estate agent for the past 2 decades. Her auburn hair was perfectly styled, and her burgundy dress looked expensive, probably something she'd bought during one of her shopping trips to Water Tower Place. "Ryan, honey, you made it," she said, pulling me into a hug that felt more performative than genuine. "We were starting to worry you'd gotten lost. You know how you are with directions." The first jab delivered with a laugh that didn't reach her eyes. I forced a smile and stepped inside, the familiar scent of turkey and sage filling my nostrils. The house looked exactly as it had during my childhood. Family photos lined the mantelpiece, most featuring Nathan's various achievements. Graduation photos, award ceremonies, that picture of him shaking hands with some senator at a fundraiser. "Where's Dad?" I asked, hanging my jacket on the coat rack by the entrance. "In the kitchen, helping Nathan with the wine selection," she replied, adjusting a throw pillow on the living room sofa. "You know how particular Nathan is about his wines. He brought 3 bottles from this exclusive vineyard in Napa Valley. Cost more than most people spend on groceries in a month." There it was again, the subtle reminder of Nathan's success and, by extension, my lack thereof. I worked as a graphic designer for a small marketing firm downtown, making enough to cover my modest apartment rent and student loans, but nothing that impressed anyone at these family gatherings. Walking toward the kitchen, I could hear my father's booming laugh. Robert Kellerman had built his contracting business from nothing, and at 57, he still carried himself with the confidence of a man who'd never failed at anything important. He stood beside Nathan, both of them examining wine bottles like they were ancient artifacts. "Ryan," my father called out, his voice carrying that tone he used when he was about to say something he thought was funny but really wasn't. "Look who finally decided to join us. I was about to send out a search party." Nathan looked up from the wine bottles and gave me a genuine smile, the only real warmth I'd felt since arriving. "Hey brother. How's the creative world treating you?" Before I could answer, my father continued, "Still drawing pictures for a living, right? At least someone's got to do it, I suppose." He chuckled and clapped Nathan on the back. Not everyone can be closing million-dollar deals like this one. The familiar knot formed in my stomach. 28 years old, and I still felt like the disappointment kid who couldn't throw a football straight or fix a leaky faucet without calling for help. I'd learned long ago that defending myself only made things worse, so I just nodded and grabbed a beer from the refrigerator. "Actually, we landed a pretty big client last week," I said, trying to inject some positivity into the conversation. "A tech startup that's looking to rebrand their entire—" "That's nice, honey," my mother interrupted as she bustled into the kitchen. "Nathan, tell your father about that new promotion opportunity you mentioned." And just like that, the spotlight shifted back to Nathan. As he launched into a story about potentially making partner at his firm, I found myself studying the kitchen where I'd spent countless hours during my childhood. The same granite countertops my parents had installed when Nathan graduated high school, the same stainless steel appliances they'd bought to celebrate his acceptance to Harvard. Looking at them now, My parents hanging on Nathan's every word, their faces glowing with pride. I realized something I'd been trying to ignore for years. This wasn't just about success or money. This was about love, attention, and feeling valued. And in this family I'd always been second best. The timer on the oven chimed, signaling that dinner was ready. As we all moved toward the dining room, passing the wall of family photos, I caught sight of myself in one of the pictures, Nathan's college graduation. There I was, standing slightly apart from the family group, my smile not quite reaching my eyes even then. "Dinner's ready," my mother announced cheerfully. "Ryan, why don't you help me carry the serving dishes?" As I followed her back and forth between the kitchen and dining room, carrying bowls of mashed potatoes and green bean casserole, I couldn't shake the feeling that this Thanksgiving was going to be different. There was something building inside me, a tension that had been growing stronger with each passing year, each subtle insult, each moment of being overlooked. The dining room table looked like something out of a magazine spread. My mother had used her finest china, the set she'd inherited from her mother and only brought out for special occasions. The centerpiece was an elaborate arrangement of autumn flowers and gourds, surrounded by flickering candles that cast a warm glow across the mahogany table. We took our usual seats, my father at the head of the table, my mother to his right, Nathan to his left, and me beside Nathan. The seating arrangement had never been explicitly discussed, but it had remained the same for as long as I could remember. My father in his position of authority, Nathan in the place of honor as the favored son, and me? Well, I was just there. "Before we start," my father said, raising his wine glass, "I'd like to make a toast." Here we go, I thought, knowing exactly where this was headed. "To family," he began, his voice taking on that formal tone he used during important moments. "And to Nathan, who continues to make us proud every single day. Son, your mother and I couldn't be more thrilled about your success. You've exceeded every expectation we had, and that's saying something." Nathan looked genuinely uncomfortable with the praise, which I appreciated about him. He'd never asked to be the golden child, and I could tell it sometimes bothered him too. "And to Ryan," my father continued almost as an afterthought, who's still figuring things out. "We're proud of you too, son. In your own way." The words hit like a physical blow. In your own way. As if my entire life and career were some kind of consolation prize, some participation trophy they had to acknowledge out of politeness. "Dad," Nathan said quietly, clearly recognizing the sting in those words. "What?" "I'm being supportive," my father protested, taking a sip of his wine. "Not everyone can be a high achiever. The world needs creative types too." My mother nodded along, adding, "Of course, dear. Ryan has his little art projects, and that's wonderful in its own way. Little art projects. Years of education, building a career, developing skills and expertise, reduced to little art projects." I felt my hands clench under the table, but I forced myself to stay calm. This was how it always went. They'd make their comments, I'd swallow my pride, and we'd move on to discussing Nathan's latest achievements. But something was different this time. Maybe it was turning 28 and realizing I'd been accepting this treatment for my entire adult life. Maybe it was the accumulation of years of subtle put-downs and backhanded compliments. Or maybe it was the 3 emails sitting in my inbox that I hadn't told anyone about yet. As we began passing around the food, the conversation naturally flowed back to Nathan's work. He talked about his latest project, some acquisition deal worth hundreds of millions of dollars, while my parents hung on every word. I found myself zoning out, watching the candles flicker and listening to the wind rattling the windows outside. "Ryan, you're being awfully quiet," my mother observed as she served herself some stuffing. "How's that little company you work for? Still hanging in there?" There it was again, little company. As if the size of a business somehow determined its worth or the value of the work being done there. "It's doing well," I replied, keeping my voice neutral. "We've actually grown quite a bit this year." "That's nice," she said in that tone people use when they're not really listening. "Nathan, tell us more about that wine you brought. It sounds fascinating." And just like that, I was dismissed again. As Nathan launched into a story about touring vineyards in California, I stared down at my plate and made a decision. Tonight was going to be different. Tonight, they were going to learn something about their underachieving son that would change everything. The secret I'd been keeping for the past 6 months was burning inside me, demanding to be released. As I looked around the table at my family, my parents beaming at Nathan, Nathan graciously accepting their praise while trying to include me in the conversation. I realized that keeping quiet had only enabled their behavior. The wind outside grew stronger, rattling the windows more insistently, and I couldn't help but think it sounded like the universe urging me forward. By the time dessert was served, they would know the truth, and their perfect little family dinner would never be the same. The conversation continued to flow around me like I was a statue at the table. My father regaled us with stories about his latest construction project, a luxury development on the North Shore that was apparently exactly the kind of forward-thinking investment this family appreciates. My mother chimed in with updates about her real estate sales, dropping casual mentions of six-figure commissions and high-profile clients. Meanwhile, Nathan tried his best to include me, asking about my work and genuinely listening to my responses. But even his well-intentioned questions felt patronizing in the context of our family dynamics. "That client you mentioned, the tech startup, are they local?" he asked, cutting into his turkey. "Actually, they're based in Austin," I replied, grateful for someone to show interest. "They're looking to expand into the Chicago market, and they want a complete visual identity overhaul. It's a pretty significant project." "Austin's hot right now," Nathan said, nodding appreciatively. "Lots of tech money flowing through there. Smart of them to expand north." My father looked up from his plate. "Austin? Never understood the appeal of Texas. Too hot, too flat, too. Texas." He laughed at his own observation. "Give me Chicago winters any day. Builds character." "The client is actually paying us more than most of our annual contracts combined," I said, hoping to inject some respect into the conversation. My mother perked up slightly. "Oh, how much?" I hesitated. This was always the trap. They wanted to quantify everything in dollars and cents, as if the only measure of success was the size of your paycheck. "It's a substantial amount," I said diplomatically. "Come on, Ryan," my father pressed, grinning. "Don't be shy. We're family." Nathan doesn't hide his success. Just last month he told us about that bonus. What was it, 60,000? Nathan shifted uncomfortably. "Dad, that's not really." 80,000, my father corrected himself proudly. $80,000 bonus for one deal. At his age. When I was 25, I was lucky to make 80,000 in a whole year. The comparison hung in the air like smoke from the candles. I could feel my jaw tightening, and I took a long sip of wine to buy myself time. Outside, the wind had picked up even more, and I could see branches swaying dramatically in the backyard through the large window behind my mother's chair. "So what's this contract worth, Ryan?" my mother asked again, her real estate agent persistence showing through. "I'm curious about what creative work pays these days." The way she said creative work, like it was finger painting or making macaroni art, finally broke something inside me. But instead of exploding, I felt a strange calm settle over me. This was it. This was the moment I'd been building toward for months. "The contract is worth $250,000, I said quietly. The table went silent except for the sound of my father's fork clattering against his plate. "What?" my mother asked, clearly certain she'd misheard. $250,000, I repeated, meeting her eyes directly. "For the initial rebrand. If they like our work, the maintenance and expansion contract is worth another $300,000 over the next 2 years. Nathan's eyebrows shot up and he set down his wine glass. "Ryan, that's incredible. Why didn't you lead with that?" My father recovered his composure first, though I could see the wheels turning in his head. "Well, that's great, son. Really. Though I have to ask, how much of that actually goes to you? I mean, you work for someone else, right? The company gets the money, not you personally." Even now, even faced with numbers that dwarfed anything I'd ever achieved before, he was looking for ways to diminish it. The familiar pattern was so ingrained that he couldn't help himself. "Actually," I said, my voice growing stronger, "that brings up something interesting. You see, I don't just work for the company anymore." My mother leaned forward, her real estate instincts sensing a story. "What do you mean?" I took another sip of wine, savoring the moment. For 28 years, I'd sat at this table feeling like the family disappointment. For 28 years, I'd listened to subtle digs and backhanded compliments. For 28 years, I'd watched my parents' faces light up when Nathan spoke and dim when it was my turn. "I mean, I bought the company," I said simply. The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway. My father's hand froze halfway to his mouth, a forkful of mashed potatoes suspended in air. My mother's eyes went wide, and she actually leaned back in her chair as if the words had physically pushed her. Nathan was the first to speak. You bought the company? When? How? 6 months ago, I replied, feeling lighter than I had in years. My boss, Mitchell, wanted to retire but didn't want to sell to some corporate entity that would gut the creative team. He offered it to me first, knowing I understood the business and cared about the employees. But how did you? My mother stammered, her carefully composed real estate agent demeanor completely shattered. How did I afford it? I finished for her. That's the really interesting part. I set down my wine glass and looked around the table at my family's stunned faces. The wind outside seemed to quiet, as if nature itself was waiting for my next words. Remember that little art project I was working on 3 years ago? The mobile app design that you all thought was such a waste of time? I let the question hang for a moment. The startup that hired me couldn't afford to pay the full design fee up front, so they offered me equity instead. 5% of the company. My father's face was slowly changing color. Ryan, what are you saying? I'm saying that startup was acquired by Google 18 months ago for $420 million, I said, my voice steady and calm. My 5% stake was worth $21 million after taxes. The fork finally fell from my father's hand, clattering onto his plate with a sound that seemed impossibly loud in the silent room. My mother's mouth opened and closed several times, but no words came out. Nathan leaned back in his chair, a slow smile spreading across his face. Holy shit, Ryan. Language, Nathan, my mother said automatically, then seemed to realize how absurd the correction was given what I'd just revealed. So when Mitchell offered me the company, I continued, I had the resources to make it happen. I bought him out for $2.5 million, kept all the employees, and we've grown revenue by 300% since then. That Austin client I mentioned? They're one of 12 major accounts we've signed this year. The room felt like it was spinning around me, but in a good way. For the first time in my adult life, I had their complete, undivided attention. Not because Nathan wasn't there to overshadow me, but because I just shattered every assumption they'd made about my life and capabilities. $21 million, my father repeated slowly, as if testing the words to see if they were real. Well, after buying the company and making some other investments, it's closer to $15 million now, I said with mock casualness. Plus the business itself is worth about $8 million based on our current contracts and growth trajectory. My mother finally found her voice. But you drive that old Honda. You live in that tiny apartment. We never knew. Because you never asked, I said, and for the first time there was an edge to my voice. Every conversation we've had for the past 3 years has been about Nathan's success and my failures. Every family dinner has been a recitation of his achievements and commentary on my shortcomings. When exactly would I have brought up my net worth? The truth of it hit the table like a physical weight. I could see the realization dawning on their faces. All those comments about my little art projects, all those comparisons to Nathan's success, all those moments when they dismissed my work as somehow lesser. Ryan, we didn't mean. My mother started, but I held up my hand. Yes, you did, I said firmly. You absolutely meant it. Every single time. And you know what? It hurt. Every single time. The candles flickered in their holders, casting dancing shadows across the faces around me. Outside, the wind had picked up again, and I could hear the first drops of rain beginning to hit the windows. The perfect Thanksgiving weather was turning stormy, which seemed appropriate for the moment. Nathan reached over and put his hand on my shoulder. Ryan, I'm sorry. I had no idea they were. I knew they compared us sometimes, but I didn't realize. It's not your fault, I told him, meaning it. You never asked for this dynamic. But they created it and they maintained it, and I'm done pretending it doesn't exist. My father cleared his throat, and I could see him struggling to process everything. Son, we're proud of you. We've always been proud of you. No, I said quietly, you haven't. You've been tolerant of me. You've made excuses for me. You've treated me like the consolation prize kid who couldn't quite measure up. But proud? Really proud? When's the last time you bragged about me to your friends the way you brag about Nathan? The question hung in the air unanswered because we all knew the truth. I could see my parents looking at each other, having one of those silent spousal conversations that happen with eye contact and slight head movements. I keep the Honda because I like it, I continued. I live in my apartment because it's in a neighborhood I love, and I'm never there anyway because I'm usually working. I don't flash money around because I watched what happened to too many lottery winners and tech entrepreneurs who couldn't handle sudden wealth. I paused, looking at each of them in turn. But mostly, I never brought it up because I realized something about our family. Your love and respect seem to be contingent on success, and I wanted to know what would happen if you thought I was just ordinary. The rain was coming down harder now, drumming against the windows with increasing intensity. The cozy dining room suddenly felt very small, very intimate, very charged with everything that had been left unsaid for too many years. Now I know, I said softly. And honestly, I'm not sure I like what I learned. The silence stretched between us like a chasm that had suddenly opened in the middle of our family dining room. My parents sat frozen, their faces cycling through expressions of shock, confusion, and what I could only describe as recalibration. Nathan kept looking between me and them, clearly processing not just my revelation but the years of family dynamics he was seeing with new eyes. My father was the first to attempt damage control, clearing his throat and straightening in his chair. Ryan, I think you're being a little unfair here. We've always supported you. Supported me? I felt a laugh building in my chest, but it wasn't a pleasant sound. Dad, 3 months ago you introduced me to your business partner as Nathan's older brother, the one who draws things for websites. Not as Ryan the business owner, not as your son with his own company, but as Nathan's brother who draws things. The memory of that moment came flooding back, standing in my father's office, watching his face as he struggled to explain what I did for a living to someone whose respect he clearly wanted. The dismissive wave of his hand, the apologetic smile, as if my presence required an explanation. I didn't mean. My father started, but I could see in his eyes that he remembered the moment exactly as I did. And Mom, I continued, turning to face her, last Christmas, when Mrs. Peterson asked about your boys, you spent 20 minutes talking about Nathan's promotion and his new condo in Manhattan. When she specifically asked about me, you said I was still finding my way, and changed the subject to Nathan's new girlfriend. My mother's face went pale. She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. The practiced composure that served her so well in real estate transactions had completely abandoned her. Nathan set down his wine glass harder than necessary, the sound sharp in the tense air. This is fucked up, he said quietly. This whole thing is completely fucked up. Nathan, please, my mother said automatically. No, Mom, he's right to be angry, Nathan said, his voice growing stronger. I've been sitting here for years listening to you both compare us, and I always thought, I don't know, I thought it was just normal sibling stuff. But it wasn't, was it? You really did treat him like he was less important. The admission from Nathan hit our parents like a physical blow. If their golden child was calling them out, they couldn't dismiss it as Ryan being oversensitive or dramatic. We love both of you equally, my mother said, but her voice lacked conviction. Maybe you love us equally, I replied, but you certainly don't respect us equally, or trust us equally, or believe in us equally. I stood up from the table, suddenly needing to move, needing to do something with the energy coursing through me. I walked to the large window overlooking the backyard, watching the rain streak down the glass. The maple tree I'd climbed as a kid was swaying in the wind, its bare branches looking skeletal against the gray sky. You want to know something else? I said, not turning around. For the past 6 months I've been looking at houses. Not apartments, houses. Real houses in good neighborhoods with room for a family someday. I could hear the sharp intake of breath from my mother, the real estate agent in her immediately understanding the implications. I've been pre-approved for a mortgage up to $3 million, I continued, still watching the storm outside. I've looked at 12 houses. Beautiful homes in Lincoln Park, Lakeview, even a few in Winnetka. I turned back to face them, and I could see my father doing calculations in his head, trying to reconcile the son he thought he knew with these new facts. But every time I was about to make an offer, I'd think about what it would be like to invite you over for dinner. I'd imagine giving you the tour, showing you the home office, the guest bedrooms, maybe the pool or the garden. And you know what I realized? The question hung in the air as rain continued to patter against the windows. I realized I was afraid you'd find something wrong with it. Some reason why Nathan's choices were better, or more practical, or showed better judgment. I was afraid to buy a house because I didn't want to give you another opportunity to make me feel small. My mother's eyes filled with tears. Ryan, honey, we never meant to make you feel small. But you did, I said simply. Every single time you dismissed my work as cute or interesting in its own way. Every time you asked if I was still doing the computer thing. Every time you introduced Nathan as our son, the investment banker, and me as just Ryan. Nathan stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. I can't listen to this anymore, he said, but he wasn't angry, he looked stricken. Ryan, why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you say something? Because it wasn't your fight, I replied. And because you're their favorite. You've always been their favorite, and that's not your fault. You didn't ask for it, and you tried to share the spotlight when you could. But the truth is, they never needed me to be successful because they had you. The words came out more honestly than I'd intended, and I could see they hit Nathan hard. He'd probably suspected the favoritism on some level, but having it laid out so starkly was clearly difficult for him to hear. My father finally found his voice again. Son, I think you're overreacting. So what if we're proud of Nathan's achievements? That doesn't mean we're not proud of yours. Dad, when's the last time you bragged about me to anyone? I asked point blank. When's the last time someone asked you about your sons and you led with my accomplishments instead of Nathan's? The silence was answer enough. You know what the really crazy part is? I continued, feeling a strange freedom in finally speaking these truths. I didn't buy that company to prove anything to you. I didn't make those investments to show you up. I did it because I saw an opportunity and I had the resources and knowledge to pursue it. But somewhere along the way, I started hoping that maybe if I was successful enough, you'd finally see me the way you see Nathan. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. $23 million. That's what it took for you to actually pay attention to what I was saying at dinner instead of waiting for your turn to talk about Nathan's latest triumph. The rain was coming down harder now, and I could hear the distant rumble of thunder. The storm was moving in fast, the kind of November weather that came out of nowhere and changed everything in a matter of minutes. But here's what I realized sitting at this table tonight, I said, walking back to my chair but not sitting down. Even now, even knowing what you know, you're not proud of me. You're shocked. You're confused. You're trying to figure out how you missed something so big. But you're not proud. That's not true, my mother protested, tears now flowing freely down her cheeks. Mom, the first thing Dad said when I told you about the money was to ask how much of it was actually mine. The first thing you said was to question why I don't act like a millionaire should act. Neither of you said congratulations. Neither of you said you were proud. Your first instincts were to find the catch, the limitation, the reason why this wasn't as impressive as it seemed. The truth of it hung in the room like the scent of rain and autumn leaves. I could see my parents looking at each other, probably realizing for the first time how their words and reactions sounded to someone on the receiving end. Nathan sat back down heavily, running his hands through his hair. Jesus, Ryan. I'm so sorry. I'm so fucking sorry. Stop apologizing, I said, meaning it. This isn't about you and it's not your fault. This is about 28 years of being treated like the consolation prize child, and I'm done with it. I looked around the dining room one more time, the perfect table setting, the family photos on the mantel, the warm lighting that made everything look cozy and ideal. This room had been the stage for so many holiday meals, birthday celebrations, and family gatherings. But it had also been the place where I'd learned that love in our family was conditional, that respect had to be earned in very specific ways, and that no matter what I achieved, it would always be measured against Nathan's success. I'm going to leave now, I said quietly. And I need you both to understand something. I love you. I love our family. But I can't keep pretending that the way you've treated me is okay just because you didn't mean to hurt me. My mother stood up, reaching out toward me. Ryan, please don't leave like this. We can talk about this. We can work through it. I've been trying to work through it for years, Mom. I've been hoping you'd see me, really see me, without needing a dramatic revelation to get your attention. But tonight proved that the only way I could get you to take me seriously was to shock you with numbers big enough to finally register. I walked toward the coat closet and they all followed me, my father still struggling to process everything, my mother crying quietly, Nathan looking like his entire worldview had shifted. The thing is, I said, pulling on my jacket, I don't want your respect because I'm rich. I wanted your respect because I'm your son, because I work hard, because I care about people and try to do good work and be a decent human being. But those things were never enough for you. Thunder rumbled closer now and the lights flickered momentarily. The The storm was getting serious, which made my dramatic exit feel almost orchestrated by the universe. "Don't drive in this weather," Nathan said suddenly. "Stay until it passes." I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw something I'd never noticed before. Maybe it was guilt, maybe it was recognition of his role in all of this, even if it was unintentional. Maybe it was just the shock of learning that his older brother had been carrying this pain for so long while he'd been blissfully unaware. "I'll be fine," I said. "I've been driving in storms my whole life." As I reached for the door handle, my father finally spoke up. "Son, what do you want from us? How do we fix this?" I paused, my hand on the cool metal of the door handle. It was a good question, and I realized I didn't have a simple answer. How do you fix 28 years of patterns? How do you undo the damage of always being second best in your parents' eyes? "I don't know, Dad," I said honestly. "I really don't know." And with that, I stepped out into the storm, leaving behind the warm glow of the dining room and the stunned faces of my family. The wind hit me immediately, cold and sharp, but it felt cleaner somehow than the air inside that house. As I walked to my car, I could see them through the window, my parents standing in shocked silence, Nathan with his head in his hands. The perfect Thanksgiving dinner had become something none of us would ever forget. But for the first time in years I felt like myself. Not the disappointment son, not Nathan's less successful older brother, not the family member who needed to be tolerated and managed. Just Ryan with all his flaws and achievements, successes and failures. The rain soaked through my jacket as I fumbled with my keys, but I didn't mind. I was finally free from the weight of trying to earn something that should have been given freely from the start. 3 weeks had passed since that stormy Thanksgiving night, and Chicago had settled into the gray dormancy of early December. From my office window on the 32nd floor of a downtown high-rise, I could see Lake Michigan stretching to the horizon, its steel-gray surface choppy with white caps that matched the overcast sky. I'd moved the company to this location 6 months ago, but I was still getting used to the view, so different from the cramped space above the coffee shop where we'd started. My assistant, Jordan, knocked on the open door frame. "Your 2 o'clock is here," she said. "And your brother called again. That's the 4th time this week." I nodded, not looking away from the lake. Nathan had been trying to reach me since the day after Thanksgiving, leaving increasingly concerned voicemails that I'd been letting go straight to my phone's archive. It wasn't that I was angry with him specifically, but I wasn't ready to dissect what had happened with any family member yet. "Send my 2 o'clock in," I said. "And Jordan? If Nathan calls again, tell him I'm fine but I need more time." The client meeting went well, another startup looking for complete brand development, the kind of project that would have seemed impossible to land just 2 years ago. As we wrapped up and they left with promises to send a contract by Friday, I found myself thinking about that night at my parents' house. The shock on their faces when I revealed the truth about my success. The way the comfortable family narrative had shattered in an instant. My phone buzzed with a text message. Not Nathan this time, but my mother. "Can we please talk? Dad and I have been doing a lot of thinking." I stared at the message for a long moment, then set the phone aside. I wasn't ready yet. 3 weeks wasn't nearly enough time to process 28 years of feeling invisible in my own family. The truth was, success had changed things for me in ways I hadn't expected. Not just financially but emotionally. For the first time in my life, I wasn't defining myself by their approval or disapproval. The company was thriving, my team respected me, and clients sought out our work specifically because of the reputation I'd built. I was finally seeing myself through my own eyes instead of through theirs. Jordan appeared in my doorway again. "There's someone here to see you. Says he's your brother, but he's not on the schedule." Before I could respond, Nathan walked past her with an apologetic shrug. "Sorry, I told her I wasn't leaving until you talked to me." He looked different than he had at Thanksgiving. Tired, maybe a little thinner, definitely less polished than his usual investment banker perfection. His expensive suit was wrinkled, and his normally perfect hair looked like he'd been running his fingers through it. "You can't just show up at my office, Nathan," I said, but without real anger. "You won't answer my calls," he replied, settling into one of the chairs across from my desk without being invited. "And we need to talk." "Do we?" I leaned back in my chair, studying him. "Because for 25 years, we've managed just fine without really talking about anything important." Nathan winced. "Yeah, about that. I've been doing some thinking since Thanksgiving. Actually, I've been doing a lot of thinking." Through the window behind him, I watched a flock of seagulls wheeling over the lake, their cries barely audible through the thick glass. The December wind was fierce today, bending the bare trees in Grant Park and sending pedestrians hurrying along the sidewalks with their coats pulled tight. "I quit my job," Nathan said suddenly. That got my attention. I looked at him sharply. "What?" "2 days ago. I walked into my managing director's office and gave my notice." He leaned forward, his hands clasped between his knees. "Ryan, that night at dinner after you left, Mom and Dad were a mess. But more than that, I was a mess. Because I realized something I should have seen years ago." He paused, looking out at the lake. "I realized that every achievement I celebrated, every success I shared with them, was built on your silence. Every time they praised me, they were implicitly putting you down. And I let it happen because it felt good to be the favorite." The honesty in his voice surprised me. This wasn't the polished, confident Nathan I'd grown up with. This was someone who'd been forced to confront uncomfortable truths about himself and his place in our family. "Why did you quit your job?" I asked. "Because I hated it," he said simply. "I've hated it for 2 years, but I kept doing it because it impressed Mom and Dad. Because it fit their idea of success. Because it was easier to be the golden child than to figure out what I actually wanted to do with my life." He stood up and walked to the window, pressing his palm against the cold glass. "You know what's funny? I envied you." "You envied me?" I couldn't keep the disbelief out of my voice. "Yeah. You were doing work you actually cared about. You were building something meaningful. You had passion for what you did even when it didn't pay well. I was making more money than I knew what to do with, but I was miserable every single day." He turned back to face me. "And then I found out you weren't just passionate about your work, you were incredibly successful at it. More successful than me, more successful than Dad, more successful than anyone in our family has ever been. And you never said a word." "What was I supposed to say?" I asked. "Every conversation we had was about your latest promotion or your latest bonus. When exactly was I supposed to bring up my net worth?" "You weren't," Nathan said quietly. "That's the point. You shouldn't have had to. We should have been asking. We should have been paying attention." The admission hung between us, and I could see the genuine regret in his eyes. This wasn't the surface-level apology of someone trying to smooth things over. This was deeper, more fundamental. "So what now?" I asked. "You quit your job to, what? Prove a point?" "I quit my job to figure out who I am when I'm not trying to be what everyone else wants me to be," he said. "And I came here to ask if you'd help me." "Help you how?" Nathan sat back down, and for a moment he looked like the little brother I remembered from childhood. Uncertain, vulnerable, genuinely seeking guidance instead of automatically assuming he had all the answers. "I want to learn the business. Not necessarily your business, but business in general. Real business, not just moving money around on spreadsheets. I want to build something that matters." I studied his face, looking for any sign that this was some kind of performance or manipulation. But all I saw was sincerity and something I'd never seen in Nathan before: humility. "You could work anywhere," I said. "Why would you want to start over in a field you know nothing about?" "Because you built something incredible from nothing, and I want to understand how you did it. Because I've spent my whole life being handed opportunities based on credentials and connections, and I want to know what it feels like to earn something through actual work." He leaned forward again. "And because I owe you. Not money, I know you don't need money. But I owe you the chance to be the teacher for once, to be the one with the answers, to be the brother who shows the other brother how to do something right." The offer surprised me. For 28 years, Nathan had been the one with the perfect grades, the impressive internships, the career trajectory that made our parents beam with pride. Now he was asking me to show him a different way forward. "It wouldn't be easy," I said. "I wouldn't give you special treatment because you're my brother. If anything, I'd probably be harder on you." "I'd expect that," he said. "I'd want that." My phone buzzed again. Another text from my mother. "Nathan told us he quit his job. We're all falling apart here, Ryan. Please call." I showed Nathan the message. He grimaced. "They're not handling any of this well," he said. "Dad's been walking around the house like a zombie. Mom keeps crying randomly. They know they screwed up, but they don't know how to fix it. And what do you think they should do?" Nathan was quiet for a long moment. "I think they should start by admitting that they treated you badly for your entire life. Not just a little bit badly, not just sometimes badly, but consistently and systematically badly. And I think they should do it without expecting you to immediately forgive them. The mature perspective surprised me. This was Nathan seeing our family dynamics with clear eyes for the first time, and he wasn't trying to minimize or excuse what had happened. And then what? I asked. Then they should figure out how to be better parents to both of us. Because the truth is their favoritism hurt me too. It just took me longer to realize it. Outside, the winter sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that reflected off the lake surface. The city lights were starting to twinkle on, and I could see the evening rush hour traffic beginning to build on Lakeshore Drive. I'll think about the job thing, I said finally. But I need you to understand something first. Nathan nodded, waiting. I'm not the same person I was 3 weeks ago. I'm not going to go back to being the accommodating older brother who swallows his pride to keep the peace. I'm not going to pretend that what happened didn't matter just because it's uncomfortable to talk about. I wouldn't want you to, he said. That version of you was smaller somehow. Diminished. Even as successful as you were always trying to make yourself smaller to fit into the space they left for you. The observation was so accurate it made my chest tight. Yeah, I was. This version of you is different, Nathan continued. You're bigger, more yourself. Even sitting here having this conversation, you're more present than you used to be at family dinners. I realized he was right. For the first time in years, I wasn't second-guessing my words or measuring my achievements against someone else's expectations. I was just myself, successful and flawed and complex and real. If you really want to work here, I said, you'll start at the bottom. Entry-level everything. You'll learn every aspect of the business from the ground up. No shortcuts, no special treatment, no leveraging your finance background to skip steps. I understand. And you'll have to deal with the fact that for the first time in your life, I'll be the successful brother and you'll be the one trying to prove yourself. Nathan smiled for the first time since he'd walked into my office. Ryan, I've been trying to prove myself my whole life. The difference is now I'll be trying to prove myself to someone whose opinion actually matters to me. As he prepared to leave, Nathan paused at the door. For what it's worth, I'm proud of you. I should have said it years ago, but I'm proud of what you built, how you handled success, and especially how you handled that night at dinner. You could have been cruel about it, could have really twisted the knife, but you just told the truth. After he left, I sat alone in my office as the city lights grew brighter below me. My phone buzzed with messages. My mother wanting to talk, my father asking if we could meet, Nathan sending a follow-up text about starting work whenever I was ready. For the first time in my adult life, my family was reaching out to me not because they needed something or felt obligated, but because they genuinely wanted my attention, my approval, my presence in their lives. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd spent 28 years trying to earn their respect, and it wasn't until I stopped trying that I finally got it. But respect that came only after a dramatic revelation, only after shocking them into paying attention, felt different than the unconditional acceptance I'd always craved. It was better than being ignored, certainly, but it raised questions about what their love had really been based on all these years. I picked up my phone and started typing a response to my mother's messages. Then I deleted it and started again. Then I deleted that too. Some conversations couldn't be rushed. Some relationships couldn't be rebuilt with a single phone call or dinner. And some wounds needed time to heal before they could be examined and discussed. But for the first time in years, I felt like I had all the time in the world. My company was successful, my team was strong, and my future was entirely my own to determine. I could decide when and how to rebuild my relationship with my parents, if I chose to rebuild it at all. As I gathered my things to leave the office, I caught my reflection in the window, a successful businessman looking out over a city where he'd built something meaningful from nothing. But more importantly, I saw someone who had finally stopped apologizing for taking up space in his own life. The storm that had erupted at Thanksgiving dinner had cleared the air in ways I was still discovering. And while I didn't know exactly what came next for my family, I knew one thing for certain: I would never again accept being treated as less than I was worth. The revelation had changed everything. And maybe, just maybe, that was exactly what we all needed.